Every flight begins and ends here. A strip of asphalt scorched by jet engines and marred with rubber. But not all runways are created equal. One of the world's most notorious is Runway 35L at Congonhas Airport in Brazil.
It could surprise you at any moment.
In July 2007, TAM Airlines Flight 3054 becomes its latest victim.
Accelerate. Accelerate. It can. It can.
The runway claims 199 lives. It would be carefully scrutinized, its history reviewed. Investigators desperately need to know why Runway 35L is so dangerous
35L.
before more lives are lost.
Mayday, Mayday.
Heavy rains pound Brazil's largest city. Sao Paulo sees this kind of deluge regularly during the winter rains. The downpour snarls traffic to and from Congonhas Airport. 800 kilometers away, TAM Airlines Flight 3054 is en route from the southern Brazilian city of Porto Alegre. The Airbus A320 is headed for Sao Paulo 90 minutes away. For the 181 passengers on board, it's a routine domestic flight. But there's been an unexpected development for Captain Henrique Stefanini di Sacco. He and his first officer, Kleiber Lima, have just learned that the heavy rain has temporarily shut down Runway 35L, the main runway of their destination.
Did they say when it would reopen?
No.
Let's prepare an alternate just in case. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like due to the weather, we may not be able to land at Congonhas as planned. I will keep you advised as I get more information.
Congonhas Airport is one of the busiest in the world. Planes take off and land here every 90 seconds, carrying a steady stream of people and cargo into the country's economic hub. But Congonhas is also notorious among pilots. The airport lies in the heart of the city, crowded on all sides by apartment buildings, offices, and roadways. Runway 35L is less than 2,000 meters long, short for large jets. Even worse, it's built on a hilltop with a sharp drop-off on all sides.
The risk the airport poses, due to its construction, due to its geography, it does not allow for simple mistakes.
Não permitiria erros simples, falhas simples.
Captain Carlos Camacho is the flight safety director of the Brazilian Pilots Union.
Quando se aproxima da pista,
As you approach the runway, your adrenaline is really pumping. For us pilots, it's like landing on an aircraft carrier.
Nós enxergamos como porta-aviões.
It makes Congonhas one of the most treacherous airports in the world. In fact, a Pantanal Airlines commuter plane spun out of control while landing just the day before. And a few months ago, disaster was narrowly averted when a Boeing 737 came skidding to a stop, just inches before the steep embankment at the end of runway 35L.
When pilots begin landing at Congonhas, they're more worried than when operating at any other national airport.
Flight 3054 is at cruising altitude south of Sao Paulo when the crew gets news that runway 35L is back in operation.
3054, 35L is the active runway.
There's no need to divert.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I have some good news for you. The runway at Congonhas has reopened. We'll arrive as scheduled shortly before 7 p.m.
The relief of the passengers is not shared by the pilot. Stefanini has an additional challenge on this flight.
Remember, we only have one reverse, sir.
Yes. Only the left.
He will have to land at one of the world's most challenging airports, with less than the usual amount of stopping power. One of the Airbus's 2 thrust reversers isn't working. The devices are designed to slow the aircraft on landing by reversing engine thrust.
If I was the pilot that day, I would be extremely concerned knowing that one of my reversers wasn't functioning.
TAM 3054, 35L, clear to land.
Stefanini will be landing on the infamous runway 35L.
The runway is wet and it's slippery. The wind is 330 at 8 knots.
The crew was informed of poor braking conditions on the runway.
The Airbus is on final approach. Even though the autopilot could get the plane to the runway, the captain decides to take over the controls himself.
Land green, manual flight.
He wants to bring the plane in as close to the runway threshold as possible. He needs every inch of runway he can get.
35L, 35L.
The concern was that after touching down, the pilots needed to be sure that they would be able to stop their plane before the end of the runway.
The passengers only know that they'll soon be landing. Now they are only 300 feet above the city. The Airbus is lined up with the center of the runway.
Middle.
The runway conditions.
200, 200. 100, 100.
1 duck now. Okay.
The plane's wheels will touch the Congonhas tarmac in seconds.
20. Retard.
As the plane touches down, their worries about landing are only just beginning.
Captain Stefanini applies reverse thrust to the A320's only working reverser.
The pilot would have to activate the reverser on the engine that had a working reverser as fast as possible to initiate deceleration.
But the plane is not slowing down.
Reverse number 1 only.
At this rate, it will use up the entire 1,945 meters of runway in less than 30 seconds.
Decelerate.
It can't!
The pilots operated the foot brakes with the pedals, pressing on them for a long time.
Look at this.
Now,
Look at this.
the aircraft mysteriously pulls to the left.
Turn! Turn!
It's almost as if it has a mind of its own.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Flight 3054 has slammed into a TAM Airlines building and an adjacent gas station. Nearly 200 firefighters descend on the scene. They face a raging fuel fire, burning at almost 1,000 degrees Celsius. The devastation horrifies Dr. Douglas Ferrari.
The explosion spread fire throughout the entire area. There was a fire in the gas station, killing the people who were filling up their tanks, burning the whole structure, turning it unrecognizable.
He had hoped to treat survivors, but now he fears there might not be any.
We had 4 cars on fire. In one of these cars, I saw a mother with her child, dead.
The entire plane is engulfed in flames. There's little hope for anyone inside. But now there is a new danger. Huge quantities of fuel in the storage tanks beneath the gas station could blow up at any moment.
The aircraft broke its wings on impact and spilled fuel throughout the entire area. There was a risk of the gas station exploding.
Rescuers hope they can save people in the TAM Airlines building. But with the fire raging out of control, they will have to act fast.
We tried to rescue the people from inside the building. I was anxious to help them.
Dr. Ferrari makes a grim find inside the TAM Airlines offices.
The airplane wing blocked the way. It prevented people from escaping. I was behind the firefighter accompanying me while he moved bodies to the sidewalk. It was a horrible feeling.
But they do locate some office workers in another part of the building and rush them to safety.
On the right side of the building, where there was no obstruction, there was time for people to get out. About 10 or 20 people made it.
No one in the aircraft has survived. 199 people are dead, including a dozen people in the gas station and the TAM building. It's the worst aviation accident in South American history.
The black boxes will not last long in the heat!
Lieutenant Colonel Fernando Camargo is an accident investigator with CENIPA, the country's aviation safety agency.
In modern aircraft, the recorders are the core of any investigation. So when we arrived at the crash site and we saw that strong fire, we got really concerned about the integrity of the data.
He knows the intense heat could already be damaging the plane's data and voice recorders. Valuable evidence that could help explain the crash may already be lost. Colonel Camargo and his team know that just the day before, another plane slid off runway 35L.
We knew that we would have to run a complete investigation on the runway.
If a rain-slicked runway caused this crash, disaster could strike again soon. The pressure is on to figure out exactly what happened to Flight 3054.
I knew that there was a video from the surveillance system.
That's the time of the accident. That must be it.
The airport surveillance system captured the doomed Airbus speeding down the runway.
This video could solve a lot of issues.
Let's see it again, please.
But the crash was outside the range of the cameras.
Can we look at this from a different angle?
Even without the crash on tape, the video could hold important clues.
Do you have tape of other A320s landing? Okay, go ahead and play it now.
We compared these time frames from one aircraft to another.
Nine seconds.
A regular landing, the aircraft would take something about 9 seconds to pass over this camera.
Okay, now the crash plane, please.
And the accident aircraft took 3 seconds.
3 seconds?
That puzzled us a little bit.
Why was the crash plane going 3 times faster than the regular A320 landing?
Four hours after the accident, firefighters are still battling the intense blaze.
The fire was a strong fire with a lot of fuel to keep it burning.
Camargo is desperate to gain access to the tail section, which contains the 2 black boxes.
They concentrated the fight in the rear of the aircraft.
Finally, firefighters beat back the flames enough to get at the recorders. But it may be too late.
They can be submitted to fire till a certain temperature. After that, there's no guarantee that data will be preserved.
The recorders will be sent to Washington to be examined at the National Transportation Safety Board. Now, investigators can focus on the infamous Runway 35L. They examine the surface for clues that might explain why Flight 3054 went so badly out of control.
We walked through the runway, searching for evidence, marks of the aircraft, the point where it veered off the runway.
It's still wet!
The water is pooling, creating puddles. That shouldn't happen on a modern runway.
When this water gets in contact with the landing gear, the tires, it can generate what we call hydroplaning. And this is a problem because a pilot will have little or no control of his aircraft.
Camargo and his team wonder why water is pooling on the runway. They study files from the government agency that runs Congonhas Airport. They learned that Runway 35L had been completely resurfaced just 1 month before the accident.
In
2007, the runway at Congonhas underwent repairs. It had been offering a very low level of traction. There were many reports of skids.
For years, pilots have been complaining about the slippery conditions.
They knew that the pavement needed to be reconstructed because the surface allowed the water to accumulate.
35L, 35L.
The runway had been resurfaced. That should have solved the water problem. It reopened just weeks before the crash. The new surface seemed to be a major improvement.
The airport operated for about a month in dry weather with no problems.
But then, 3 days before the crash, heavy rains began.
And with the rain, all the problems that were supposed to be solved came back.
On the night of the accident, the biggest problem was still the water. Aircraft were still reporting difficulties braking.
Estavam reportando que havia dificuldade para frenar.
Runway is wet and it's slippery.
In theory, there was no more depressions on the runway to accumulate water. So what could cause water to accumulate?
He discovers that the repair work lacked a critical safety feature.
Proving to be done at a later date. No wonder it was wet.
Special grooves that carry away rainwater. Without them, rain would collect in puddles.
E essa reforma, ela ainda carecia de amadurecimento da pista.
The repairs still lacked the necessary upgrade. It was very difficult to interrupt the operation of the main runway in order to install the grooves.
A instalação, a implantação dos grooves.
Evidence is mounting that a compromised surface on runway 35L played a key role in Brazil's worst airline accident. Colonel Camargo is concerned that Brazil's notorious rains may bring more runway disasters.
Soon after the accident, we recommended the suspension of the operations of regular aircraft in rainy conditions.
The airport authority complies, shutting down runway 35L until answers are found. But the main runway at one of the world's busiest airports can't stay closed for long. They must find out what caused this accident as soon as possible. Their focus turns to the A320's thrust reversers. The plane's maintenance records reveal why only one of them was working. 4 days before the crash, mechanics deactivated the right engine's thrust reverser for routine maintenance.
Check E3 found.
But the aircraft had then flown without incident for 4 days.
Action required.
Not only had the plane landed repeatedly with one thrust reverser, it had even landed safely on runway 35L.
This plane landed on the same runway. On the same runway that day with the same problems, had only one thrust reverser. Just one thrust reverser. No issues whatsoever.
So why had this landing gone so wrong? Colonel Fernando Camargo travels to Washington, D.C. Technicians at the National Transportation Safety Board will help him try to recover data stored in Flight 3054's badly burned flight recorders. First, they look for a temperature-sensitive chip that could provide a clue as to how bad the heat damage might be.
There is an indicator that turns the color if it was exposed to a temperature above that one that it was manufactured to support.
Even though the boxes are designed to survive a fierce fire of up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, the chip's appearance is worrying news.
These boards were submitted to a fire that exceeded its limitation.
They test the circuit board to see if any of the memory survived. Without the data, the investigation into Flight 3054 would be effectively crippled. Colonel Camargo may never know why 199 people died at Brazil's busiest airport. But the circuit board test provides some hope.
Okay, we got something.
Fortunately, everything works okay. We could recover 100% of the data.
Here we go.
The information paints a picture of the plane's performance.
The speed is fine.
In the critical seconds before the crash.
It came down fine. Brakes were engaged. The brakes were engaged.
The data confirms that the foot brakes were working properly and that the A320 did not skid or slide.
Here.
Then Camargo discovers that the plane's two engines were inexplicably operating against each other.
Engine 1.
The plane's left engine was in reverse to help slow the aircraft down. But the right engine, the one with a disabled thrust reverser,
it's powering up.
Was doing the opposite.
For takeoff. It's supposed to be idling.
Instead of winding down, it was accelerating to climb power.
Accelerate.
It can.
Accelerate.
It can.
With one engine at full power, the pilots didn't have a chance to stop their aircraft in time.
This aircraft was braking.
Oh my God! This.
But it would take around 1 more kilometer for it to stop.
The lopsided thrust pushed the plane to the left.
The right engine really was increasing thrust. There was no means available for the pilot to avoid the aircraft to veer off to the left.
Could be this.
So engine 2 was thrusting when it should have been idling. That would explain the veer off to the left, right? So what does this mean?
Now Colonel Camargo needs to figure out why the right engine was at full power when it should have been in reverse.
At that time, we could establish roughly 2 main lines of investigation. One, mechanical failure. And the other one, pilot error.
Colonel Camargo brings in human factors investigators Lieutenant Colonel Marcia Farja and First Lieutenant Vanessa Diaz.
Pilot is Enrique Stefanini Di Sacco, age 53, from Sao Paulo, 13,654 flight hours.
The pilot, who was in command, was a very experienced pilot. He knew the aircraft very well.
His first officer was Aguiar Kleber Lima, age 54, from Puerto Velo, 14,760 flight hours.
He had enough training to do a good job, including in an emergency situation.
Their job is to determine if the crew somehow made an error that could have caused one engine to stay at full power.
Machines are straightforward because they work in predictable ways. Humans are infinitely more complex in the way they think and act. It's much harder to analyze their behavior in an accident.
But I can't believe that this pilot would make that kind of mistake. Okay.
The human factors team must now conduct a psychological study of the crew to understand how they might have committed a fatal misstep.
We attempted to reconstruct the individual history of each crew member and their experience.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I have some good news for you.
And tried to create a picture that could help us explain what happened in the cockpit.
Colonel Camargo still believes a mechanical failure is more likely. He now turns his attention to the complicated mechanics that link the thrust levers to the engines. He must determine if a failure there led to the mysterious power surge.
We began studying the thrust system, each and every component of the system, from the lever to the engine.
We've been through it. We know it's not the FADEC.
There's nothing wrong with the engines. That leaves only one component that could have caused the problem. The mechanism that links the throttles to the engines, a device called an artificial feel unit, or AFU. Investigators wonder if that device failed, leaving the engines at full power even though the pilots set the lever to idle. But such a failure is highly unlikely.
It's really a remote possibility. 400 billion hours of flight for us to have one occurrence of that.
Still, he needs to rule out the AFU as a possible cause of the crash. But he's not sure the unit can even be found amongst the wreckage.
Computers, all the avionics, everything was gone.
Luckily, one of the few pieces to have survived the fire is the piece investigators now need, the AFU. It's sent to a specialized laboratory that can scan the metal for microscopic markings.
Well, look.
It got melted in such a way that you can work with it, so we could check something.
The 3D scanner allows them to look for nicks or scratches that would indicate the unit failed.
I'm looking for any unusual marks in this area.
If we could find out any mark, any evidence of the position of this gear, we could go after the lever and find out the real position of the thrust lever.
But they can find no evidence that the AFU malfunctioned.
Okay, pack it up, let's go home.
We found nothing. No mark, no evidence.
Colonel Camargo concludes mechanical failure was not to blame for the improper power setting on the right engine. He has to assume that for some reason, the crew left the right engine lever at full power after the Airbus landed. Back in Sao Paulo, the Human Factors team turns to the cockpit voice recorder, or CVR.
I have some good news for you. Runway at Congonhas.
They need to understand the pilot's state of mind as they approach Sao Paulo the night of the crash.
The CVR enables us to get an idea of the interaction between crew members.
They learn that Captain Stefanini was quite concerned about the runway conditions.
Ask him about the rain. The runway conditions. Is the runway slippery?
TAM on final approach. 2 miles away. Could you confirm conditions?
It's wet and it's slippery, 3054.
Wet and slippery.
The pilot is already tense, and then he finds out that runway conditions are worse than usual, slippery and rainy. The tension can affect the pilot's perception, his concentration.
35 out, 35 out.
It now appears that Stefanini's anxiety about 35L, and not the runway itself, was the main cause of this crash. Camargo now focuses on the crew's actions.
I think it's ready, sir.
Thank you.
He needs to understand how the power levers were handled before the crash. Using data from the flight recorder, investigators focus first on the landing just prior to the one at Congonhas.
We discovered that the same pilot, the captain, was the one operating the aircraft in the previous land and in Congonhas.
First, how did they land in Porto Alegre?
Okay. Both levers full forward during approach.
They learned that during the previous landing in Porto Alegre, Captain Stefanini pulled back both thrust levers. exactly the right procedure for landing with only one reverser.
And now, both levers to reverse.
At the time of the accident, the correct procedure was for the pilot to take both throttles to idle and both throttles to reverse, as if you had no problem with the reversers.
They've established that Captain Stefanini carried out the correct procedure for landing with one thrust reverser on the day of the crash.
No reverser number 2. Auto brakes on, and speed is dropping.
It puzzled me because of the fact that a captain knew the procedure, he performed the correct procedure hours before in the previous landing.
So what did he do differently 2.5 hours later in Sao Paulo?
Okay.
Okay, now Congonhas.
Left lever to idle.
The data shows that Captain Stefanini's handling of the thrust levers
Then reverse.
was very different on his landing in Sao Paulo.
20.
Instead of throttling back both levers, he only put the left engine in idle, leaving the right one at full power. Then, once the aircraft had touched down, he activated only the left reverser, again leaving the right engine at full.
That is quite different. I don't get it.
How could a guy that knew the aircraft, that knew the correct procedure, that executed a correct procedure, how could he do something different?
It doesn't seem to make sense.
We could really use your help on this.
Until Camargo enlists the help of another pilot. It's only then that he discovers an important detail that could explain what the captain did. It turns out there was an older, outdated procedure for landing an A320 with a single thrust reverser.
Could you demonstrate it for me, please?
It starts out the same, but then there's an important difference.
The former procedure was taking both levers to idle and then just the lever corresponding to the engine with the reverser operating normally, that would be taken to reverse position.
But that is not what Captain Stefanini did. He left the right engine at full power instead of bringing it to idle. If he was attempting the old procedure, he got it wrong. Investigators learned that Captain Stefanini would not have been the first pilot to make that mistake. There had been several accidents around the world. The cause was identical. Pilots mishandling the procedure for landing with a disabled reverser, inadvertently leaving one thrust lever at full power.
That old procedure led pilots to error.
Airbus finally modified the procedure to reduce the risk of precisely that error.
The manufacturer changed the procedure and determined that both levers would come down together to the idle position, and then, right after touching the ground, both would come down to the reverser position.
Captain Stefanini was familiar with both the old and the new procedure for landing with a disabled reverser. It now seems on Flight 3054 he may have tried to use the old one. The question for investigators is why? Investigators still can't understand why the crew of Flight 3054 left an engine at full power after touching down.
Did they get it wrong?
But after interviewing other pilots, they do understand why using the older procedure would have made sense that rainy day at Congonhas. It would bring the plane to a stop much more quickly than the new one.
That could explain why the captain would go for the former procedure that he knew that was more efficient than the current one.
Investigators theorize that in reaction to deteriorating conditions at Congonhas,
Wet runway, one reverser. I'm going to buy us some runway and use the old procedure.
he was trying to ensure that he'd have as much distance as possible to stop on the notorious runway 35L. But he made a costly error.
Under those circumstances...
Remember, we only have one reverser. We have one reverser, manual flight. Wet, slippery. One reverser, manual flight.
It is completely understandable that he had tried a former procedure and under such a pressure made a mistake.
Lieutenant Vanessa Diaz recreates the final moments of the flight in a simulator.
Okay, engine 1 to idle, engine 2 stays at climb.
She notices that in a dark cockpit, it would have been difficult to see the position of the thrust levers.
20. Retard.
Engine 1 to reverse, don't touch number 2. Brakes.
No simulador, nós temos como programar todas.
In the simulator, we were able to program in every known factor.
Nublado, chovendo.
The chronology of events, whether it was cloudy or raining, the wet surface, the slippery surface, position of the levers.
Dos manetes estarem na posição.
We also went off the runway and had an accident in the simulator.
E tivemos acidente no simulador.
Lieutenant Diaz believes she now understands why TAM Airlines Flight 3054 ended in tragedy. Captain Stefanini had done everything he could to ensure the A320 would touch down on runway 35L with as much room ahead of him as possible.
Land green, manual flight.
But the prospect of landing on the treacherous runway had so unnerved him that he bungled a simple procedure.
It's possible that tension might block a crucial motor response. It can affect the pilot's ability to react.
There was no alarm to warn them that one engine was speeding up while the other was in reverse. First Officer Lima tried to figure out what was going wrong.
Decelerate!
But in a dark cockpit,
It can't!
overwhelmed by a landing going badly, he didn't notice the abnormal thrust lever settings.
Decelerate! Decelerate!
Pilots were unable to understand what was happening to their aircraft.
Conseguindo perceber o que estava acontecendo na aeronave.
Look at this!
A runway with a dangerous reputation so unnerved a crew that they made a mistake that ended up killing 199 people.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Go!
Since the crash of Flight 3054, the runways at Congonhas have been grooved and are regularly inspected. New rules are in place dictating wet weather landing procedures.
In rainy weather, you need to have all of your reversers operating.
But despite these efforts to improve safety at Congonhas, many pilots doubt it's any better.
Congonhas is not safer today. It continues to be a dangerous airport. Only a total ban on operations in wet or rainy conditions would improve the safety of this airport.
What's clear is that even today, 35L is a runway that cannot shake its deadly reputation.
35L, 35L.
A Boeing 747 slams into the English countryside.
It was like a battlefield.
Complete and utter devastation.
Where was this 747?
Investigators have all the clues they need to figure out what caused the accident.
The aircraft took off with the same defect that it had arrived with.
But they can't explain why no one on board did anything to prevent it.
They seem to be ignoring the alarms completely.
The first officer was about to die, and he didn't say anything. How can this happen?
The answer lies not at the crash site, but thousands of kilometers away, buried in hundreds of years of history.
Mayday, Mayday.
Gary Dan is enjoying the Christmas holiday at his home just north of London.
I told you I don't like them.
It was a Christmassy family get-together. It was just exchanging of presents. And that's when I heard the noise of the plane coming over. It got louder and louder. It was almost like the plane was going to take the chimneys off, it felt, and heard the noise that close to the house.
Living less than 2 kilometers from Stansted Airport, Dan is used to hearing jets, but not this close.
I looked out the window, saw the plane coming over with fire coming out of the engines. As it came over, it sort of banked heavily left, and then just kept banking and banking.
A Korean Air 747 slams into a forest in the village of Great Hallingbury.
This was just a huge, huge explosion that you're watching it happen with a plume of fire coming towards you. I collected a torch. We ran downstairs saying, the plane's gone down, we've got to go and help. My brother and I ran outside and ran towards where it happened. We were racing towards where we could see the plume of smoke and fire because there's still lots of aviation fuel popping around the area. We ran and jumped into a very large crater, just shouting out, "Hello! You know, any survivors, please shout."
Hello! Can anybody hear me?
The aircraft had created a 30-foot plus crater. Wreckage was spread out over at least half a mile. It was like a battlefield.
We dialed 999.
A plane's gone down in Hatfield Forest in Great Hallingbury.
It takes nearly half an hour for rescue workers to arrive. They quickly determine that there are no survivors. A multi-million-dollar plane and thousands of kilograms of cargo are completely destroyed. It's up to the UK's Air Accidents Investigation Branch to figure out why.
This is a very sophisticated aircraft, flown by a trained crew, and somehow they had lost control of this aircraft. How can this happen?
Stansted Airport, on London's northeastern edge. The airport is a major European hub for low-cost passenger carriers and cargo flights from around the world.
It really was buzzing. Lots of people there queuing up, checking in, people arriving, lots of meeters and greeters, lots of coaches. So it really was a fairly busy hub just on that run up to Christmas.
Flight 8509 is a Korean Air cargo plane.
The aircraft was a Boeing 747 freighter. As the name suggests, it was not configured with passenger seats, but the interior was full up with freight.
Departing from Seoul, South Korea, the jumbo jet stopped in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, before arriving at Stansted. It will now continue on to Milan, Italy, with a new captain and crew. In the hold, a load controller directs the offloading and onloading of cargo. He makes sure that the more than 63,000 kilograms of freight is stowed safely and securely. More than just stacking boxes, the job can have a critical effect on the flight characteristics of the plane itself.
Loading the aircraft has to be done in a manner that keeps the weight distribution within limits, so that you can't put all the heavy stuff in the back and all the light stuff in the front, for example, because it would tend to tip up and make control difficult, and that would be very dangerous.
Captain Park Duck-kyu is a highly respected commander.
Sir.
And a former colonel in the Korean Air Force, with thousands of hours of flying time on the 747. Park Hun-kyu is Flight 8509's flight engineer, responsible for monitoring the aircraft's mechanical systems. First Officer Yoon Ki-sik is new to the 747, with 195 hours flying time on the aircraft.
On this night, there were the 3 crew and a Korean engineer.
The engineer has overseen some minor maintenance work on the aircraft and will now accompany Flight 8509 back to Seoul.
All right, gentlemen, if departure goes smoothly, we may just make our scheduled time. Let's proceed. Stansted clearance delivery. Korean Air 8509 requesting clearance to Milan.
Korean Air 8509, we have no flight plan. Cannot clear you.
Copy that. Stansted, stand by for flight plan.
Every commercial airplane needs to file a flight plan before it can leave the ground.
Contact our people and get them to refile the flight plan. Hurry up.
Ground control.
Korean Air 8509 must wait while the document detailing their planned route is filed.
As far as the air traffic control system is concerned, it's just another aeroplane. It has to obey all the same operational rules and procedures as any other aircraft, passenger or freight.
Korean Air 8509 cleared to Milan via Dover.
6 Romeo.
Korean Air 8509 cleared the Dover 6 Romeo, squawk 2230.
Now nearly an hour behind schedule, the crew gets clearance to taxi. It's 6:25 p.m.
Korean Air 8509, line up on runway 23.
Position and hold, runway 23. Korean Air 8509.
Captain Park is well aware they have no hope of arriving in Milan on time.
Korean 8509, clear takeoff, runway 23.
Finally.
$80 knots.
Roger.
V1. Rotate.
The plane takes off from Stansted Airport at 6:36 p.m.
Positive rate confirmed.
Gear up.
Gear up. Passing 900 feet.
The aircraft had taken off and climbed to about 2,500 feet.
Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft was making a turn.
Left turn at 1.5 DME.
Copy that. Left turn at 1.5 DME.
The aircraft started its turn to the left.
Heading standby, sir. Heading 158.
The captain's artificial horizon tells him that the plane isn't turning.
Bank's not working.
Bank! Bank! Look! Bank!
For some reason, Flight 8509 has gone from takeoff to total destruction in less than 60 seconds. Korean Air Flight 8509 lies in pieces just a few kilometers from one of the busiest airports in the world.
We had no wreckage, really, that was above knee height. Where was this 747?
After any major crash, Britain's Air Accidents Investigation Branch deploys a safety specialist to the site.
I'd like to take a look around if I could.
Sid Hawkins' job is to assess the level of danger at the crash site.
One of the key things to do is to get investigators into site to start work. And for somebody like me who's looking after their safety, there's always a challenge for me to try and hold them at bay until we've done our initial site assessment.
His first concern, the 30 tons of fuel the 747 was carrying on takeoff.
Is that fuel still on site? If it is, that poses quite an immediate hazard for the team there. In addition to that, what sort of cargo are we dealing with? Are we dealing with just general cargo, or are we dealing with dangerous goods?
Let's shut down the scene for the night. It's too dark and dangerous. Notify your people.
There was no lighting, and it actually was very, very dangerous for the investigators and the rescue services.
Investigation of the crash site will have to wait till morning. But before they leave the area, they make a key find. One of the plane's 2 black boxes.
This was crucial, the discovery of the recorders on the day.
The cockpit voice recorder is extremely important dealing with any accident where we have no crew that have survived. It tells us what they were saying, it gives us an idea of the environment in the cockpit, and it records the sounds from the cautions and warnings that go off in the cockpit.
But this black box has suffered extreme damage. It's too soon to say whether the CVR holds valuable clues that could help explain the sudden crash, or if the last recorded moments of Flight 8509 are gone for good.
Meg!
Meanwhile, the AAIB has begun work closer to the Stansted terminal on the airport runway. The team's operations investigator is David Miller.
We had been out on the runway, having received a report from the airport that the runway was covered in debris.
With Miller at the airport is engineering investigator Steve Moss.
The things that go through your mind are possibly what's known as an uncontained engine failure, which means that the engine has burst and left bits on the runway.
Investigators wonder if the plane actually began to disintegrate on takeoff. Among the small pieces of wreckage on the runway is an especially chilling piece of evidence.
Something that looked very much like a human jawbone.
And of course, then your mind starts to race, what on earth's gone wrong? You know, has somebody been hit by the aircraft as it took off?
We wondered whether somebody had committed suicide, had run towards the aircraft and thrown themselves into the engine, affected its performance, and that had brought it down. We really didn't know.
The runway investigation has stopped all flights in and out of Stansted Airport. The shutdown comes just days before Christmas.
The terminal was seething with people. The pressure on us was tremendous to get that runway open.
Korean airline representatives arrived at Stansted Airport this morning. They're here to talk to accident investigators, both to try to assess what's known about the crash as well as to answer questions.
And there are sure to be a lot of questions. The destruction of Flight 8509 is the 5th major accident for Korean Air in the past 2.5 years. If the AAIB can figure out what happened near Stansted, they may be able to break this deadly pattern.
Daylight and the remains of a 747 lying in a path of destruction on the edge of an English village.
It was a very confusing debris field. It takes a while for one to absorb the scene and to try and make sense of it all.
By daylight, they get their first good look at the point of impact. A massive crater surrounded on all sides by scattered debris.
In fact, what we were seeing on the runway was debris from the explosion, which had blown debris high into the air and had been carried downwind and just happened to deposit on the runway.
The far-flung wreckage also helped solve the mystery of what seemed to be a jawbone on the runway.
Closer examination the following morning revealed that it actually was a bit of twisted plastic.
Safety specialist Sid Hawkins now turns his attention to the shattered remnants of the plane's cargo.
If you can imagine 40, 50 tons of cargo, almost all of it packed in cardboard boxes, and the explosion being so severe that every piece has been destroyed, then it gives you an indication really of just how severe this explosion was.
He needs to know if any of it poses a risk to investigators.
We had a consignment of corrosive materials.
Hawkins learns that Flight 8509 also carried military detonating cord, 2 tons of whiskey, color printer cartridges, even an X-ray machine. But he soon establishes that none of it poses a serious threat.
We're able to determine that the dangerous goods from this aircraft had all been destroyed.
But there is one more significant risk Hawkins must assess, one that stems from the design of the plane itself.
We know that this aircraft carries depleted uranium in its tail section, both in the rudder and in the elevators.
The 747-200 series uses depleted uranium as ballast to improve stability in flight. But tests show that none of the radioactive material has escaped.
You feel then that it's safe enough for the guys to start work.
Meanwhile, investigators are still trying to learn if the aircraft broke up before crashing.
I did see a glow, which could have been the plane alight.
I noticed the engines were on fire before it hit.
I explained to the investigators that when I looked out the window, I saw the plane coming over, and then I saw flames coming out of an engine.
Dan's observation raises the possibility that the left side engines flamed out, causing the plane to roll to one side.
It's safe. But be careful down in through there.
To determine if the plane hit the ground intact, they carry out what they call the four corners search.
Have we got both wings? Have we got the tailplane? Have we got the fin and rudder? And the answer eventually was yes, we have, and we were satisfied that there had not been a structural failure of the aircraft in the air.
While locating the four corners, investigators also discover some very distinctive marks on the ground.
It was a long, slender gash, which was made by the wing, and then you could see where the nose had impacted further on. From the shape of the ground marks, you try and understand what attitude the aircraft was in when it hit the ground.
The ground scar gives investigators a revealing glimpse into the flight's final seconds.
The aircraft struck the ground at high speed, steep left bank, steep nose down, and it's an almighty amount of energy.
Of course, it could be that somehow or other the pilot's been misled by his instruments and has become what we call disorientated.
The team brings some of the aircraft's instruments back to the AAIB labs for examination.
We found a few pieces of the ADIs.
The ADI, or Attitude Director Indicator, is a flight instrument that displays the plane's bank and pitch.
When you're flying at night in cloud, there are no visual cues. So he has an artificial horizon or an attitude direction indicator in front of him.
Modern aircraft have 3 instruments, one in front of each pilot and a standby one in the center panel. So if one of them should fail, the pilots can compare their instruments with the standby instrument and see which 2 agree and which one disagrees.
We found only fragments, and we were able to forensically examine these.
They discover that the captain's artificial horizon seems to have malfunctioned. It was showing the plane flying level at the point of impact. That contradicts evidence found at the crash site. But without the plane's flight data recorder, investigators can't explain the discrepancy.
What we needed was that recorder to give us the confirmation of the exact flight path of the aircraft.
Pre-flight maintenance records would normally shed some light on the situation, but not in this case.
Technical log from this flight was not available to us. It had been destroyed in the impact, and unfortunately, a copy was not left at Stansted. It should have been.
For more information, investigators interview the crew that flew the plane to Stansted on the previous leg of the flight.
I need you to walk me through exactly what happened.
They told us that when they departed from Tashkent the day before, in good weather, in daylight conditions, they had to carry out a turn to the left. As the captain commenced the turn, his artificial horizon did not work in roll.
In the daylight, the pilot was able to get his bearings from the horizon outside.
In order to resolve this issue, the captain selected number 3 as his source, and his instrument worked perfectly. They continued the flight and landed uneventfully at Stansted.
After landing, the inbound crew left the terminal before the replacement crew arrived.
The normal practice is if a inbound crew were to meet the outbound crew, there would be a verbal handover, a debrief, if you like, of the state of the aircraft.
But that didn't happen. Instead, the only person that heard about the ADI problem is the Korean Air maintenance engineer.
Okay, I'll have a look.
Korean Airlines had dispatched an engineer to take charge of any work that needed to be done on it.
The Korean engineer didn't have the tools he needed for the job, so he enlisted some local help.
I need you to remove the captain's ADI.
The story of the repair only deepens the mystery. The inbound crew knew they had a faulty instrument and they had it fixed. And yet on takeoff, Captain Park's artificial horizon did not work according to the evidence found at the crash site. The Korean engineer is dead. The only person they can ask about the repair is the British mechanic who helped him.
The locally based engineer told us he removed the instrument from the panel, unplugged the wires at the back.
All right, that's our problem. Can you reset the pin?
And found what he believed to be a problem with the connector pins at the back of the instrument. He replaced the connector in the right way, put the instrument back into the instrument panel, and then carried out a test.
Looks good.
As far as the engineer was concerned, the problem was solved.
Had the maintenance actions actually fixed the defect?
They hope the answer will be found on the flight data recorder. It has finally been recovered at the crash site.
To find that in amongst all the wreckage at the bottom of a 30-foot crater took a considerable effort. It took 7 days to find it.
But when they download the data, something doesn't add up. The readout is showing that the plane's roll angle never exceeded 2 degrees.
Clearly it had gone in at a much steeper roll angle than that, like 90 degrees. So that set the alarm bells ringing. Why should that occur?
Why a Korean Air 747 crashed just moments after takeoff from London's Stansted Airport is a mystery investigators are only beginning to unravel. The flight data recorder from Korean Air 8509 reveals that the faulty ADI reported by the previous crew seems not to have been fixed after all. They need to understand how the fault in the plane's navigation system was for some reason misdiagnosed.
How exactly did your crew report this problem?
Upon landing, the inbound crew's flight engineer noted the problem with the ADI by entering a code in his technical log. He then mentioned it to the maintenance engineer.
Okay, I'll have a look.
The normal action is to take the code that's entered and then look in the corresponding fault isolation manual, which has the same corresponding numbers, and that would then tell him what the fault was and what he had to do about it to fix it.
But the Korean Air engineer didn't have a copy of the fault isolation manual. Without it, he couldn't correctly identify the proper repair. Instead, he tried to troubleshoot the problem as best he could.
All right, that's our problem.
This is when we go into the detailed evaluation of the aircraft manual, the component manuals, right down to the wiring manuals.
After an in-depth analysis of the plane's navigation system, they finally figure out what was wrong with the captain's artificial horizon. It was being fed corrupt information. The real problem lay deeper, with a device called an inertial navigation unit, or INU. Units deep inside the airplane send pitch and roll data to the captain and first officer's ADIs. Investigators conclude that one of the INUs short-circuited.
It simply ended up in corrupting the roll information that was fed to both the flight data recorder and the captain's ADI.
All the maintenance work done on Flight 8509 was misdirected. What they had repaired was never the problem at all.
Really, they were barking up the wrong tree.
I need you to remove the captain's ADI.
If the fault isolation manual had been available, they might have deduced that the correct maintenance action was to replace the number 1 INU, not the captain's ADI.
The rectification action was completely ineffective. The aircraft took off with the same defect that it had arrived with.
An instrument failure is a rare occurrence. However, crews are trained to deal with it.
Checking each of the 3 ADIs should have allowed the captain to identify the problem. The recorded flight data shows that both the first officer's ADI and the backup instrument displayed the plane's correct bank angle. Only the captain's artificial horizon was wrong. How the crew dealt with that defect in the seconds after takeoff could be the key to understanding why the flight ended in disaster. Investigators finally have new insight into those crucial last moments.
Sir.
AAIB technicians have salvaged the recording from the badly damaged CVR.
대답해. 얼마나 연결될 것인지 그들이 묻고 있어. 네가 말하기 전에 그들이 무엇을 말하고 있었는지 확실해.
One of the most important things that was on that recorder was the sound of a warning horn going off in the cockpit as the aircraft departed from Stansted.
But even more significant than the sound of the alarm is what is not on the tape.
They seem to be ignoring the alarms completely.
There was no discussion about the fault with the artificial horizon.
The alarm is telling the pilots one of their ADIs is malfunctioning. They should check the third instrument to see which ADI is correct. But the pilots remain strangely silent.
The flight engineer saw the standby horizon, looked at the other instruments, and actually pointed out this problem to the captain.
Bank's not working.
But the captain did not respond to that, either in words or deeds.
Investigators are also troubled by the fact that the first officer, who had a working ADI, did nothing to save the plane.
Why didn't the first officer say anything? Here, he was in a situation where he was about to die. He knew that the instruments were at fault, the comparator buzzer was going off, and he said nothing.
Bank! Bank!
The co-pilot should have said to the captain, your ADI is not reading correctly.
He should have forcefully said to the captain, mine's correct, I have control, let me take control.
The correct response to that would have been, yes, you have control.
But the co-pilot said nothing.
The CVR also answers a lingering question concerning some of the eyewitness accounts of the crash.
The CVR gave no indication that there was a fire on board the aircraft. You would have heard of an engine fire bell, which is a very distinctive warning, and we didn't hear that.
The fact that some witnesses were wrong doesn't surprise Moss.
There's all sorts of things people can see in bad weather conditions at night. Reflections of the aircraft's lights or the navigation lights sometimes can mislead people into thinking there's a fire there.
Investigators now want to know more about the crew members who let a minor malfunction lead to a catastrophic crash.
We listened to the words on the tape, but of course they were in Korean. We had the translation in front of us, but it was very difficult to determine the tone of what was said and how it was said. And we had someone who spoke Korean listening to this conversation, telling us the social interaction between the two crew.
They can hear that prior to takeoff, the captain was becoming more and more agitated by the delays.
Korean Air 8509, please explain your delay.
Answer them. They're asking how long the delay will be. Make sure you understand what they're saying before you speak.
Stansted clearance, standing by for new flight plan for Milan.
The captain was very overbearing. He was very critical of the first officer.
And the first officer was quite subservient in this conversation. He did all the listening, the captain did all the talking.
So you'd say he's being condescending?
Miller can't help but wonder what would have happened if the captain had listened to the engineer's warning. He wants to know if there was enough time to save the plane. Using a flight simulator and data from the flight recorder, they recreate the entire flight. The simulation reveals that impact with the ground was not inevitable.
It was possible, just possible, to recover the aircraft about 500 feet above the ground, doing about 260 knots at 80 degrees of bank. If you knew what was happening, you could have just recovered the aircraft, just skimming the ground in doing so.
The results convince Miller and his team that they need to better understand how Korean Air trains its flight crews.
It was obvious from this accident that the crew interaction played a big part in this accident, so we needed to go to Korea to see how the crew were trained.
In Korea, Miller gets an opportunity to observe Korean Air flight training firsthand.
There was definitely a hierarchy between pilots. The captain was supposedly the older, the wiser, the more experienced, and the first officer was the younger, inexperienced apprentice. Crews were working in a very procedural way. There was not really much free thinking to deal with an unusual situation.
The crew dynamic observed in the Korean training session is strikingly similar to what was recorded in the cockpit of Flight 8509. Investigators dig into Captain Park's personal history.
A lot of the captains in Korean Air were people that had developed their skills in the military.
Captain Park had been a colonel, a pilot with a distinguished career flying small, lightweight fighter jets.
Korean culture at the time suggested that these pilots needed to hold a position that was commensurate with the rank that they had when they were in the military. So it would be a great loss of face for a colonel in the military to be given the job of a first officer. He would go into the company as a captain.
Park became a captain even though his experience was flying solo in fighter jets, not as part of a crew on large commercial jets. By piecing together the puzzle of miscommunications, unexpected glitches, and crew dynamics, investigators believe they finally understand why Korean Air 8509 hit the ground less than 60 seconds after lifting off from the runway.
This is inexcusable. If we hit one more delay.
Korean 8509, clear takeoff runway 23.
Clear for takeoff runway 23. Korean 8509. Clear for takeoff.
Finally.
A series of delays put Flight 8509 behind schedule, testing the patience of the captain. The first officer remained quiet, trying to avoid conflict with a senior colleague.
To operate any aircraft, you need the crew to be working as a team. You don't want an autocrat in one seat and somebody who's very subservient in the other.
V1, rotate. Positive rate confirmed.
Gear up.
Gear up.
You have to have the crew talking to each other, feeling free to comment and criticize if necessary what the other's doing.
The critical moment came as the captain turned his control column to the left. His artificial horizon didn't move.
And that would have been very confusing. He would have wondered why. And in fact, what he did was put more bank on and more bank and continued to increase the turn rate.
Bank! Bank!
The flight engineer knew that the aircraft was starting to bank at an extreme angle. But Captain Park ignored all warnings.
In fact, he had received a reprimand some months before because he had not correctly followed an instrument departure procedure. And we think that this was uppermost in his mind, that he had to follow the correct procedure to avoid getting another rap across the knuckles, I suppose.
To make matters worse, he had no visual reference and likely couldn't feel the drastic bank.
If the instrument is saying, no, you're straight and level, then that's what you believe, even though the aircraft is banked at quite a high angle.
Crews are trained to trust their instruments and not their senses. Captain Park trusted his ADI in spite of overwhelming evidence that it was wrong.
The first officer should have said to the captain, look at the warning buzzers going off. It's very difficult to understand his reactions or lack of reactions. But I think a lot of it is embedded within the culture I was at that time.
Fearing dishonor more than death itself, the first officer did not dare criticize his captain, or even attempt to correct his actions.
This crew were not operating as a crew, they were operating as one man with a couple of assistants.
The aircraft just continued to roll. 30 degrees, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 degrees of bank.
Investigators now suspect that the seeds of the deadly crash were sown hundreds of years before the 747 ever left the ground.
Sir.
For centuries, a rigid class structure based on social hierarchy defined Korean culture. Investigators have come to see how the Korean military, an honor-bound institution, has strongly influenced commercial aviation. It's now clear that strict adherence to cultural norms put the crew of Korean Air 8509 in danger from the moment they entered the cockpit.
It's very difficult to overcome entrenched cultural values.
The different stature of the two pilots was also reinforced by a disparity in military rank.
We believe that the cultural values within which these two people were raised was overwhelming in this instance.
The relationship between the two pilots was not that of equals. Just 2.5 years earlier, a Korean Air flight went down in the South Pacific, killing more than 200 people.
Korean Air had been going through quite a rough patch. One of their aircraft had been involved in an accident in Guam.
Poor crew communication and long-standing rules of hierarchy had also contributed to the crash in Guam.
Their reputation was not good. Then this accident had come along.
The US military stops using Korean Air to ferry its personnel in the Pacific region. The airline comes under strict scrutiny around the world. With the crash of Flight 8509, Korean Air's reputation is in ruins.
At a news conference, the Korean airline officials made the startling admission that military pilots, many of whom were recruited by the airline, sometimes take unnecessary risks.
Despite all the negative publicity for the struggling airline, investigators see a way to help Korean Air overcome its safety problems.
I think all accidents have a lesson or lessons to be learned that will improve aviation safety.
The AAIB recommends that all imported training materials be modified to better accommodate Korean culture. Korean Air's training programs are radically overhauled to improve pilot performance and foster a completely new culture within the cockpit.
After the accident in 1999, Korean Air, I believe, entered into a significant program to improve its safety record. That company have introduced a much more rigorous process, and they really have invested very, very heavily in the flight safety aspects that came out of this accident.
In this case, the issues of communication, the issues of how aircraft are maintained, and also the very important conclusions regarding cockpit resource management.
The statistics show that the safety record of Korean Air since these events around 1999 is such that it is now regarded as a very safe airline.
As a direct result of the crash of Flight 8509, Korean Air has been completely transformed. Since 1999, the airline has not had a single crash or fatality. It has become one of the most highly regarded airlines in the world.